Hi, my name is Thomas from Complexity Guys, and I am in conversation with my colleague Matthew about complex issues such as leadership and social processes in organizations. In this small series of conversations, our topic is virtual communication and its impact on organizations, and we are joined by Joe, who is by now quite an expert in both technical aspects and social dynamics such communication brings. We are consultants who are used to work virtually for a long time now, and therefore we kind of saw that it'll be very easy to consult on this very fast change to virtual communication that has been required in the beginning of this year. And many organizations were very quick at adopting new technologies, and some were very good at the virtual communication. However, lately we are getting some messages and some experiences from them that are saying that in spite of a good effort and improving quality of technology and communication and virtual communication skills, people are still confused. People are interpreting things the wrong way, and some are even flatly refusing to participate because they say there is nothing available at those virtual meetings for them. So if this sounds familiar or something that you experience, you are not alone. You are part of a growing number of bigger organizations where virtual communication is becoming slowly the norm, and in the same time, there is something missing. What we are replacing with virtual communication is only part of our normal communication processes. And that's something that we kind of don't see very well. And the response to this confusion and deteriorating understanding is to put more and more effort into more technologies and improving your digital skills. And yet, I think that's not the right approach, because there are situations that will be very difficult to solve in any by any type of technology, and that's why we are inviting you to a conversation about what's going on actually.
So I've been in a lot of frustrating meetings over the past 6, 7, 8 months. Don't you think that is quite an important place to start? People getting their Zoom skills sorted?
It is. I think it is a place to start. It's something that creates the base layer upon which we need to build our communication. But we are forgetting that that's the base layer, and we think that once we get our virtual skills honed and our technology polished, everything will be fine. And I think what we are experiencing is that that's not the case. And there are several reasons why it is not the case. One that comes to my mind is that when we replace the virtual communication, when we replace the communication by virtual meetings, what is missing are many layers of social processes that are going on naturally in background of normal day-to-day office meetings, and now there is no space for those.
What kind of things do you mean?
Well, I think the best example would be a situation where you have a potentially difficult message to communicate to whole organization. So suppose you have a whole organization meeting, many, sometimes more than 100 people in a virtual meeting, and the message talks about cuts, possibly losing some jobs, which is hard thing to hear, even if it's delivered personally. And I've had a client recently who had such a meeting, and what happened was that after the meeting, there were many different and very diverse interpretations of what happened. So some people heard absolutely nothing. They felt everything is rosy. The other extreme was that people were alarmed and they were fearing the complete disruption of everything. Other people felt they need to protest and start to put their stake in the ground and ask for more, and others withdrew completely. So the organization was confused. How is it possible that when we deliver a single message at the same time to everybody, we have such a varied understanding of what's going on?
Yeah, that's interesting. I've my partner was working in an office and now has been working at home, and they have a monthly town hall meeting where they give the kind of company wide announcements and the kind of things you're talking about, the bad news and the good news as well. And yeah, it's been interesting because sometimes I end up in the same room and hearing it, and he might talk to me about it afterwards rather than the people that would have been there in the office.
Well, that's exactly the problem. That's the social process that is missing. Because when you have a normal office situation, people usually get out of the meeting and talk to their colleagues and make sense of what was said. So this is a good example of replacement, perhaps, of that social process. But usually people don't have such an opportunity. And when the Zoom or Teams or whatever technology you are using is switched off, you are sitting there with the bad message and you are on your own and you make sense of it on your own.
Maybe I'd like to throw in some perspective here. I think it's interesting that there's a real tendency, I think, to idealize what's come before or idealize something which is different. I've encountered a lot in conversations with clients, are kind of like, communication used to work so well, or communication's breaking down, implying that it wasn't broken down before. And, how can we restore things to normal? How can we get them back to the way they were? As if that would certainly be an improvement. When I listen to the example that you're giving, Thomas, of leaders bringing difficult news, disturbing news to a large group of people, and then responding to that in different ways, I don't think that that's so surprising and confusing. I think it's quite normal when we deliver a message to a large group of people that they understand it in a myriad of different ways. But I think, as you're pointing to, what is a challenge is that we haven't really established clear habits in the virtual space for how we make sense of that together. And because we are separated, we're not forced into a position where we need to do that. So if we were together in person and we received that news, people may have widely different perspectives about what they heard, but they were in a position where they're together with other people and they will start to rehearse their understandings. So you start to check your understanding with your colleagues and with a diverse range of colleagues, because you're in this very heterogeneous group. So you start to say, "Ooh, did you hear what the CFO was saying? That sounds really worrying. What do you think?" And the other guy says, "Oh, I don't think it was that bad because of this and this and this." And you go, "Oh, okay." But we haven't really established a clear and agreed upon kind of sets of habits and norms around how we do that in the virtual space, which is not to say that it's not happening at all. And I think that's what Joe's story helps us to see, is that it is happening. Well, but it's not happening in ways that we quite understand, or that we have a kind of shared approach to. So, it happens much more those informal conversations happen out of the office. They happen at home much more than they did in the past. Sometimes people are having, parallel conversations on WhatsApp next to the Zoom or next to the Teams meeting, or, secret comments in the background. But we miss a lot of the things that we normally rely on, the kind of water cooler conversation, just making eye contact across the room and a little smirk. So I think that is disturbing and it's disorientating. And I think that's a lot of the challenge that we're bumping into. I think,
but maybe what you are talking about is making another or creating another problem, that when you say we don't have habits established, I can see that there are some processes already establishing in this communal sense making or meaning making that are actually not very good for coherence of the community, because when we are communicating virtually, it takes more effort to establish a communication, and because it takes more effort, people will probably tend to get in touch with those who agree with their ideas, and that very well, or we can see that already happening, that will create pockets of people who are supporting each other in their particular and partial views, and creating kind of different groups that are holding very different opinions without ability to make sense of why the other group sees things differently, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's spot on, Thomas. I think this issue of kind of a partial perspective. I think there's something in the virtual space which seems to exacerbate that. And I think there are a couple of aspects. I think you've touched on one. I think a part of it is also that meeting online is, I mean, being with other people is inherently performative. It's inherently about how we present ourselves in the way that we think is appropriate for whatever context. But there's a way that meeting online is particularly performative because we have so much more control over the staging. We have just this little box, we have just this kind of bust to worry about, and we have such clear boundaries. There's no, you pop on, you pop off. So you can have a very polished perspective. You can control your emotions a lot more. I speak to a lot of people who talk about sitting through a meeting, maintaining their composure, and leaving as soon, bursting into tears as soon as the meeting ends. That's a lot more difficult to do when you're in person. So I think there's a part of that about how we're able to compartmentalize our performance and provide a much more limited and contrived presentation of self.
Yeah.
And then I think in addition to that, there's this aspect of the fact that because we're not together in a group, as you're saying, we go out to make a connection with other people rather than finding ourselves in the midst of it. So when we're in an office, we find ourselves in a heterogeneous group where we're constantly exposed to difference. So we're needing to take those different perspectives into account, to agree with them, to disagree with them, to listen to them, to ignore them, but we can't ignore them completely because they're all around us. When we're alone in our office, we have a lot more choice in terms of what we filter in and out, and we can choose to reach out to people who we already know are going to resonate with what we're saying or confirm what we're saying, unless we have a strong kind of habit of trying to, welcome in and seek additional perspectives, which not many people do. So I think that's quite right. I think there's a kind of confirmation bias, which, takes root in the virtual space. And we've seen that before because, this is proving to be a massive problem, for instance, in social media, supported by some algorithms, of course, but where people are just receiving the news which they want to hear. And I think that can add to the sense of kind of polarization and division between different ways of understanding things in organizations.
So what you are saying is actually pointing out to many other layers of this problem, because I talked about the meaning making with peers and possibly the pockets of different understanding, but you mentioned public and hidden transcript. You mentioned the performative nature, which are other layers that we need to talk about later as well.
But
so it sounds like when we were working together in offices, there would be gossip that would happen, and that could happen by chance with people that you hadn't necessarily picked to gossip with. But now I'm choosing the 2 people I gossip with every day, and that means that is very limited, and the sense making just stays, our little bubble, we stick with our opinion, and another little bubble will stick with their opinion. And that's how when there's this message that goes out, we have really, really polarized ideas about what's actually been said.
It's difficult to eavesdrop on a WhatsApp chat.
Yeah. And I'm in enough WhatsApp groups, I don't want to eavesdrop in them as well. So yeah, and the other thing I wanted to mention was, so what Thomas said as well was about coherence, and how that lack of coherence about what's going on in an organization, we then blame on technology. So we're like, oh, that's happening because we're having to work virtually. That's the problem. And we ignore that a lot of these things were going on before, and if we weren't working virtually, they would continue to happen.
And they are perhaps more visible when we are working virtually, and more taxing to the whole ability to communicate with each other. So we are just more aware of those.
Yeah.
So thank you very much. And if you are experiencing something similar or have an opinion, let us know and be in conversation. And we will invite you again for our continuation of this talk. Thank you.